Hi there, I'm so glad you could join me tonight. If you're here, it's likely because you're seeking a moment of calm, something to settle your thoughts and ease you into a peaceful sleep. Tonight, I'll be sharing a series of fascinating and mysterious true crime stories. These aren't just accounts of events, they're windows into the complexities of human nature, filled with twists, emotions, and lingering questions. I'll keep my tone gentle and calming, making sure these stories soothe rather than startle you. You might find yourself drifting between curiosity and calm, letting your mind wander into the narratives as your body relaxes into rest. Don't worry if you fall asleep halfway through. These stories will keep flowing softly in the background, ready to carry you off into dreamland. The stories tonight are a mix of mystery, emotion, and humanity. So grab your favorite blanket, take a deep breath, and let's get started. And don't worry, if you fall asleep halfway through, I'll still be here sharing these stories in the background. Story 1. The Menendez Brothers. Let's begin with a case that's as tragic as it is shocking. The story of Eric and Lyle Menendez. At first glance, the Menendez brothers seemed to have it all. They were the sons of Jose and Kitty Menendez, a wealthy and seemingly perfect couple living in Beverly Hills. Jose was a self-made millionaire, the kind of man who believed in hard work, control, and success at all costs. Kitty was a devoted mother, or at least she appeared to be, but behind closed doors, their family life was a different story. On the night of August 20th, 1989, everything shattered. The brothers made a frantic 911 call, screaming that someone had broken into their home and killed their parents. The scene was gruesome. Jose and Kitty were found shot to death in the living room. Jose's body was riddled with bullets, as if the killer had been filled with rage, while Kitty had been shot in the face, making her unrecognizable. At first, the police suspected a mob hit. Jose had a tough, cutthroat business style, and maybe he'd angered the wrong people. But soon, inconsistencies in the brothers' stories started to surface. Why had they been out that night buying expensive tickets to see Batman at a local theater, acting carefree? And why did their grief seem, well, rehearsed? Weeks turned into months and the investigation stalled until Eric cracked. You see, Eric was the younger brother, the sensitive one. Unlike Lyle, who was confident and dominant, Eric always seemed to carry a weight he couldn't shake. In a therapy session, Eric confessed to his psychologist that he and Lyle had killed their parents. That confession unraveled the whole story. But here's where things get complicated. The Menendez brothers claimed they hadn't just killed their parents out of greed or resentment. They said they had been driven to it by years of abuse. Jose, they alleged, was not the successful, loving father he pretended to be. Behind closed doors, they said he was a tyrant. He controlled every aspect of their lives, from their careers to their relationships. And worse, they accused him of physical and sexual abuse that started when they were young. The brothers described their home as a prison, where their mother Kitty, though not abusive herself, was complicit. Kitty turned a blind eye to the horrors her sons faced, drowning her own pain in alcohol and pills. The boys said they felt like they were living in constant fear, waiting for the next explosion from their father. But why kill them that night? The brothers claimed it was because their father had threatened to kill them if they revealed the abuse. They believed their lives were in danger and that the only way to survive was to strike first. Now let's pause here for a moment. Think about what they were saying. Were they really victims of unimaginable abuse, pushed to a breaking point? Or were they cold-blooded killers who used a fabricated story to justify their actions? That's what the jury had to decide. During their trial, the courtroom was riveted by the brothers' testimony. Eric cried openly on the stand, recounting details of the abuse that were almost too graphic to bear. Lyle, the older brother, was more composed but equally emotional. The defense painted a picture of two young men who had been broken by their parents' cruelty, but the prosecution argued that the brothers were motivated by greed. After all, in the months following their parents' deaths, they had spent over $700,000 on luxury items, from designer clothes to a Rolex watch. The trial ended in a deadlock. Some jurors believed the abuse allegations, others thought it was all a calculated lie. A retrial resulted in a conviction for first-degree murder, and the brothers were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even now, years later, the case sparks debate. Were the Menendez brothers victims or villains? The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. What's undeniable is that theirs is a story of family secrets, desperation, and the devastating consequences of unchecked power. The next story is one that's baffled investigators for years. It's a story with no clear answers, but it's so full of strange details that it feels like a puzzle you can't stop thinking about. This is the disappearance of Maura Murray. Maura was a 21-year-old nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She was smart, athletic, and by all accounts, had a bright future ahead of her. But in February 2004, something strange happened that no one has been able to fully explain. On February 9th, Maura emailed her professors and work supervisor, telling them she had a family emergency and would be leaving town for a week. There was no family emergency. That same day, she packed up her car, withdrew nearly all the money in her bank account, around $280, and set off on a drive that would take her into the mountains of New Hampshire. It was a cold, snowy evening when Maura's car skidded off a winding road in Woodsville, New Hampshire, and crashed into a snowbank. A nearby resident who saw the accident from his home came out to offer help. He said Maura seemed shaken but unhurt. She declined his help, saying she'd already called for roadside assistance. But here's the thing, no call was ever made. When police arrived about 10 minutes later, Maura was gone. Her car was still there, locked with her belongings inside, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. So what happened to Maura Murray? That's the question that's haunted her family, investigators, and internet sleuths for 2 decades. One theory is that Maura left voluntarily, that she wanted to start a new life. There were signs that she might have been struggling in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She'd been caught using a stolen credit card, and she'd recently been in a car accident that left her father's car damaged. Some people think she was overwhelmed by her problems and decided to run away. But if that's true, where did she go? And why has no trace of her ever been found? Another theory is that Maura was abducted. The area where she disappeared is remote, with dense woods and few houses. If someone with bad intentions had been driving by at the right or wrong time, it's possible they could have taken her. But again, there's no evidence to support this theory. Then there's the possibility that Maura got lost or injured in the woods. It was freezing that night, and she wasn't dressed for the weather. If she'd wandered into the forest, she could have succumbed to hypothermia. But despite extensive searches, no remains have ever been found. The more you dig into Maura's story, the stranger it gets. There are details that don't add up, like why she was heading to New Hampshire in the first place. She hadn't told anyone about her plans, and there was no clear reason for her to be in that area. Over the years, Maura's case has become a magnet for online detectives, who have analyzed every piece of evidence and debated every theory. Some people think there's a cover-up, while others believe her disappearance is simply a tragic mystery that may never be solved. Whatever happened to Maura Murray, her story is a reminder of how fragile and fleeting life can be. One moment, you're driving down a snowy road, and the next, you're gone. All right, the next story really sends chills down my spine, but in the most fascinating way. It's a tale of double lives, deception, and one man's shocking transformation. Story 3. The John List Murders. This story takes us back to November 1971 in Westfield, New Jersey. John List was a quiet, devout Lutheran who seemed like an ordinary suburban father. He had a wife, Helen, and 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. They lived in a sprawling 19-room mansion, complete with a ballroom, and from the outside, they looked like the picture-perfect American family. But appearances can be deceiving. John was struggling. He'd lost his job as an accountant months earlier and had been secretly draining his mother's savings to keep up with the mortgage and other expenses. He was deeply ashamed of his financial troubles, and he believed that admitting failure would disgrace his family in the eyes of their church and community. One day, John made a chilling decision. Instead of confessing his struggles, he decided to save his family from the shame he believed was inevitable. On the morning of November 9th, 1971, John sent his children off to school as usual. Then he went upstairs and shot his wife Helen in the back of the head as she drank her morning coffee. Next, he went up to the third floor and killed his mother, Alma, who was 84 years old. When his children came home from school, he killed them one by one. Patricia, the eldest, was 16. John Jr. was 15, and Frederick was 13. John later said he thought he was sending them to heaven, sparing them from the shame of poverty and failure. After committing these horrific murders, John carefully cleaned the crime scene, wrote a detailed confession letter to his pastor, and fled. Before leaving, he turned on all the lights in the house, put on classical music, and vanished. For nearly 18 years, John List lived a new life. He changed his name, remarried, and moved to Colorado, where he became a respected member of the community. He was eventually caught in 1989, thanks to a segment on America's Most Wanted and a forensic sculptor who created an eerily accurate age-progressed bust of him. When John was arrested, he showed no remorse. He claimed he believed he had done the right thing for his family. Even in prison, he maintained that his actions were guided by his religious beliefs, as twisted as they were. John List's story is one of the darkest examples of how desperation and delusion can lead to unthinkable acts. It's a chilling reminder of the lengths some people will go to when they feel cornered by life. All right, the next one is a little different. It's got mystery, intrigue, and even a touch of glamour. But don't worry, it's just as calming as the others to help you wind down. Story 4. The Black Dahlia Murder. This story is one of Hollywood's oldest and most infamous unsolved mysteries. It's a story of beauty, ambition, and a crime so shocking it's been immortalized in pop culture. Elizabeth Short, known posthumously as the Black Dahlia, was a 22-year-old aspiring actress whose gruesome murder in 1947 stunned Los Angeles and the world. Elizabeth was found in a vacant lot, her body severed in two with surgical precision. The brutality of the crime, combined with Elizabeth's striking looks, captivated the media and turned her into a tragic icon. Elizabeth's life was far from glamorous. She struggled to find steady work in Hollywood and often relied on the kindness of strangers to get by. But she had big dreams and a magnetic personality that drew people in. The case remains unsolved, despite decades of investigation and countless theories. Some believe Elizabeth was killed by a doctor due to the surgical nature of her injuries. Others think she fell victim to a serial killer. The Black Dahlia murder is a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the glittering facade of Hollywood. Story 5. Elisa Lam. Elisa Lam was a 21-year-old Canadian student who had been traveling alone through the United States in early 2013. She was a social media enthusiast, often sharing her thoughts and experiences online. Elisa had been staying at the infamous Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, a place known for its dark history in association with several notorious events. The hotel, which had been the setting for suicides and criminal activity, would soon be the place where Elisa Lam's story took a chilling turn. On January 31st, Elisa checked into the Cecil Hotel, excited to explore the city. However, her behavior began to raise concerns. Staff and guests noticed her acting strangely, and her friends and family grew concerned after they didn't hear from her for several days. On February 1st, Elisa went missing, and the hotel staff, in cooperation with police, began searching for her. Days passed without any sign of Elisa. The hotel was searched extensively, but she was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until February 19th, after hotel guests began complaining about low water pressure and a strange taste to the water, that a maintenance worker went to the roof to investigate. There, hidden inside one of the water tanks, he found Elisa Lam's lifeless body floating in the water. The discovery of Elisa's body in the tank, though tragic, was not what made the case so chilling. It was the events that occurred prior to her disappearance. Shortly before her death, surveillance footage from the hotel's elevator surfaced. The video, taken on January 31st, showed Elisa behaving erratically. She appeared to be pressing multiple buttons in the elevator, peering out of the doors nervously, and even stepping in and out of the elevator as if she were trying to avoid someone or something. The footage was unsettling, and it went viral, sparking widespread speculation and theories about what had happened to her. Some suggested Elisa had been playing with the elevator buttons, but her anxious movements and odd behavior led others to believe she was hiding from an unseen threat. Her strange behavior on the elevator footage raised even more questions after her body was found. How did she end up on the roof? How did she manage to climb into the water tank, which was difficult to access and covered? And why was she alone in such a vulnerable state? Authorities ruled Elisa's death as accidental, citing that she may have been experiencing a mental health crisis, which caused her to wander to the rooftop and climb into the tank. However, the bizarre circumstances surrounding her disappearance and death have kept people captivated, with many still speculating whether foul play was involved. The case of Elisa Lam is a reminder of the complexities of mental health, the dangers of isolation, and the terrifying mysteries that can unfold in the most unexpected places. Her story remains one of the most unsettling and tragic mysteries of the 21st century, haunting the halls of the Cecil Hotel and the minds of those who have heard it. As you listen to Elisa's story, imagine the uncertainty, the unease of trying to make sense of the inexplicable. Let this feeling slowly fade as we move on to another mystery that has haunted America for decades: the Zodiac Killer. Story 6. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is one of the most infamous and mysterious serial killers in American history, a figure whose identity has never been conclusively determined. This elusive killer terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area in the late 1960s and early 1970s, taunting police and the public with cryptic letters and complex ciphers. His story is one that blends a chilling reign of terror with an enigmatic quest for recognition. The first confirmed Zodiac murder took place on December 20th, 1968, when high school students Betty Lou Jensen, 16, and David Faraday, 17, were shot and killed near Vallejo, California. The young couple was parked along a remote road when a man approached their car, shot them both, and then fled the scene. It wasn't until July 4th, 1969, that the killer would strike again, this time targeting two more victims, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, near Blue Rock Springs Park. Darlene was killed instantly, but Michael survived, offering police a description of the shooter. This was the first time authorities had a potential lead. The Zodiac's next move was the one that would cement his name in history. In August 1969, he sent a series of letters to 3 newspapers, claiming responsibility for the Blue Rock Springs attack and offering chilling details of the crime that had not been released to the public. But the Zodiac didn't stop there. His letters were filled with taunts, boasting of his ability to evade capture and offering cryptic puzzles for the public to solve. One of the letters contained a cipher, which he challenged readers to decode. In one of his most famous letters, he included a promise that he would eventually reveal his identity, but he never did. The Zodiac's cryptic messages didn't just target the police and the public. They became a twisted form of communication, feeding his need for attention and power. He was not only a killer, but also an enigmatic figure playing a game with law enforcement and society. The letters he sent contained a mixture of arrogance, veiled threats, and a strange obsession with his own identity, as if he wanted the world to know how clever he was, how much control he had over the situation. The Zodiac's reign of terror continued through the late 1960s and early 1970s, with confirmed murders in Lake Berryessa in 1969 and the killing of a young couple, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard, near a secluded lake. This time, however, the Zodiac did not kill immediately. He tied up the victims and then began talking to them. He told Brian and Cecilia that he was a wanted man, and in a chilling moment, he even gave them the details of the murders he had committed. After stabbing them both, he calmly walked away from the scene. Despite the Zodiac's brutal crimes, he remained elusive. Police could never connect him to a specific identity, and his cryptic letters only added to the growing sense of confusion and fear surrounding the case. In 1974, after a series of increasingly strange and bizarre communications, the Zodiac seemingly disappeared from the public eye. Some believe that he moved on to other regions or stopped killing, while others suggest that the Zodiac may have continued his crimes in secret, his identity still hidden in the shadows. The most unsettling aspect of the Zodiac case is the killer's ability to remain undetected for so long. Even though police received numerous tips and leads, and many suspects have been proposed over the years, no one has ever been definitively linked to the killings. The Zodiac's letters, ciphers, and cryptic symbols remain an unsolved mystery, tantalizing those who try to piece together the puzzle he left behind. For many, the Zodiac represents not just a terrifying killer, but a dark and mysterious figure who remains out of reach, defying authorities and mocking them from the shadows. His story is a haunting reminder of the unanswered questions and the chilling possibility that we may never know the true identity of the Zodiac killer. As we take a deep breath and let that chilling tale fade into the background, we move forward to another story, a bizarre and eerie case that has left many puzzled: the Hinterkaifeck murders. Story 7. The Hinterkaifeck murders. The Hinterkaifeck murders are one of the most eerie and perplexing unsolved crimes in history. This case, filled with mystery, intrigue, and strange occurrences, took place on a farm in rural Germany in 1922. It remains one of the most chilling stories of an unsolved mass murder, haunting not just the small village where it occurred, but the entire world for decades. The Hinterkaifeck farm was situated on the outskirts of the village of Kaifeck, which was located about 40 kilometers north of Munich. It was isolated, surrounded by dense woods and farmland. In early March 1922, the Gruber family, consisting of 63-year-old Andreas Gruber, his 72-year-old wife, Kazilia, their 35-year-old daughter, Victoria, and her two children, Kazilia, age 7, and Joseph, age 2, lived there. Despite the isolation, neighbors would occasionally visit the farm, but the Grubers were mostly cut off from the outside world. Everything began to unravel on the night of March 31, 1922. The Grubers were brutally murdered inside their home, and the crime was carried out in a manner that still confounds investigators to this day. The murderer, or murderers, used a variety of weapons, including a pickaxe, to commit the crimes. What made this case so strange was that the killers didn't immediately flee the scene. In fact, they stayed on the farm for several days, seemingly at ease, as if they were part of the household. And the first clue that something was wrong came when the maid, who had been working at the farm, didn't show up for work the next day. When the neighbors didn't see the Gruber family for a while, they began to worry. A search of the house revealed the horrifying scene. Andreas and Kazilia Gruber were found dead in their bed, both struck with the pickaxe. Their daughter Victoria was found in the attic, where she had tried to escape the killer. Victoria's two children were also found dead in their beds, and Kazilia had been strangled. As investigators began piecing together the events leading up to the murders, they discovered an unsettling detail. The Grubers had reported strange noises and sightings in the weeks leading up to the murders. Andreas Gruber had told neighbors he had discovered strange footprints in the snow around the house, leading into the woods and then disappearing. He also mentioned hearing voices in the attic, but when he investigated, he found nothing. These reports made it clear that the family had felt threatened before the killings. Perhaps the most eerie aspect of the Hinterkaifeck murders was the behavior of the killer after the crime. The farm was not immediately abandoned after the murders. In fact, it was said that the killer has stayed in the house for several days. They ate the family's food, milked the cows, and even fed the animals. For some reason, they didn't flee immediately. This behavior has led to speculation that the killers may have been someone who knew the Gruber family and had lived among them for a time, which raises more chilling questions about the identity and motivations behind the murders. The investigation into the Hinterkaifeck murders was extensive, but despite numerous leads and suspects, the case went cold. Over the years, various theories have been proposed, but none have been conclusively proven. Some believe that the killer was someone who had worked on the farm or had been close to the family. Others suggest that it could have been a stranger who knew the family's routines and took advantage of the farm's isolation. One theory posits that it could have been one of the family members themselves, possibly Victoria's estranged husband, who had been involved in an ongoing feud with the family. What makes the Hinterkaifeck case particularly haunting is the eerie atmosphere surrounding it. The strange noises, the unexplained footprints, and the fact that the killer spent several days on the farm after the murders create an unsettling narrative that continues to captivate anyone who hears it. The gruesome nature of the murders, combined with the strange details and unanswered questions, has kept this case alive in the public imagination. Despite multiple attempts by police to uncover the truth, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved to this day. The farm, long abandoned, is said to be haunted, and many locals claim to have seen strange occurrences around the site. The true identity of the killer or killers remains one of the greatest mysteries in crime history, and it is likely that the secrets of Hinterkaifeck will never be fully revealed. Story 8. The Villisca Axe Murders. On the night of June 9, 1912, the small town of Villisca, Iowa, was rocked by a gruesome crime that would go unsolved for decades. In the early hours of the morning, 6 members of the Moore family, Josiah, Sarah, and their 4 children, along with 2 house guests, Lena and Ina Stillinger, were brutally murdered in their sleep. The killer used an axe to slaughter them all, and the crime scene was horrifyingly meticulous. The murderer wiped down the axe, closed the curtains, and even placed the victim's hands in certain positions, all while leaving no clues behind. The family's home, a modest farmhouse in Villisca, had been eerily quiet on the night of the killings. Josiah Moore, the father, was a successful businessman and had no known enemies. The family was well liked in the community, making the crime all the more shocking. The investigation was chaotic. Law enforcement had very few clues, and the local population was thrust into a frenzy of fear and speculation. The fact that the family's 2 house guests, the Stillinger girls, were also murdered intensified the mystery. Several theories were proposed over the years. One possibility was that the killer had some sort of personal vendetta against Josiah Moore or his family, but no clear motive emerged. Numerous suspects were put forward, but the most prominent one was a man named Reverend George Kelly. Kelly, a traveling preacher who had been in Villisca around the time of the murders, was questioned several times. He had a history of mental instability and had been involved in several strange incidents before, leading many to suspect him. However, despite a highly publicized trial, there was insufficient evidence to charge Kelly, and he was eventually acquitted. The case continued to linger in the community's memory with various theories and speculations. Today, the Villisca Axe Murder House is a popular tourist attraction. Visitors can take tours of the home, which is said to be haunted by the spirits of the murdered family. Despite the many years that have passed, the true identity of the killer remains a mystery, leaving the town of Villisca haunted both by the crime and the unanswered questions that remain. Story 9. The Amityville Horror Murders. The Amityville horror case is one of the most well-known stories in American criminal history, blending a real-life murder with a story of alleged paranormal activity that has captivated people for decades. It all began on the evening of November 13, 1974, when Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 members of his family in their home in Amityville, New York. Ronald, who was 23 years old at the time, had a history of violent behavior, and his family was known to have been dysfunctional. The victims were Ronald's parents, Louise and Ronald Sr., and his 4 siblings, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John. They were all found in their beds, shot in the head while they slept. Ronald DeFeo Jr. claimed to have been possessed by a voice inside his head that told him to kill his family. The details surrounding the murders were chilling. DeFeo used a rifle to shoot each family member one by one as they slept. After committing the crime, he walked to a nearby bar and nonchalantly told people that his family had been killed. He even went back to his house to help the police with the investigation. Ronald was arrested shortly after, and during his trial, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. But it was not the murders themselves that would make this case infamous. In 1975, just over a year after the murders, George and Kathy Lutz, along with their 3 children, moved into the DeFeo family's house. The Lutz family lasted only 28 days in the home, reporting a series of terrifying paranormal events. They claimed to have witnessed strange occurrences like doors slamming shut, foul smells, cold spots, and even the sensation of being physically attacked by unseen forces. The Lutz family's terrifying experience would be detailed in the book, The Amityville Horror, which was later adapted into a movie. The book, in subsequent film adaptations, ignited widespread interest in the case, with many people questioning whether the Lutz family had fabricated the supernatural events in order to profit from the tragedy. In the years since, numerous investigations have been conducted at the Amityville house, but no clear evidence of paranormal activity has ever been found. Some believe that the Lutz family may have experienced psychological trauma from the knowledge of the murders, and that the fear they experienced was rooted in the house's tragic history. Others maintain that the house is indeed haunted, and that the spirits of the DeFeo family remain trapped within its walls. Despite the controversy surrounding the alleged haunting, the Amityville horror case remains one of the most chilling and enduring tales in the annals of American crime. The murders, combined with the Lutz family's eerie experiences, continue to captivate audiences, raising questions about the line between reality and the supernatural. Story 10. The disappearance of the Sodder children. On Christmas Eve in 1945, a devastating fire tore through the Sodder family's home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. The fire claimed the lives of 5 children: Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, and twins Jenny and Betty, who were 8 years old. But mysteriously, no remains were ever found. The family's parents, George and Jenny Sodder, managed to escape, but their children were believed to have perished in the blaze. However, there were numerous strange and unexplained events surrounding the fire that led the Sodders to believe their children had not died in the blaze. For one, the fire had been so intense that it completely destroyed the house, yet no remains of the children were ever recovered. Even more puzzling, the family's Christmas lights were still on when they fled the house, and the phone lines had been cut, leading many to believe the fire had been deliberately set. George Sodder, a successful businessman and war veteran, was determined to find the truth. He hired private investigators, spread flyers, and even offered a reward for information. Over the years, a series of bizarre leads surfaced, including reports of people who had seen the children alive after the fire. Some claimed to have seen them in nearby towns, while others suggested that the children had been kidnapped and forced into hiding. The most compelling theory suggested that the fire had been a cover-up for an abduction orchestrated by individuals with a vendetta against George Sodder. It was thought that George's outspoken opposition to Mussolini and his connections to the Italian-American community may have made him a target of enemies. Some even suggested that the fire had been set by the mafia in retaliation for George's political views. Despite numerous investigations and the passage of time, the disappearance of the Sodder children remains unsolved to this day. The fire was ruled accidental, but the lack of remains, the strange circumstances surrounding the incident, and the many unsubstantiated sightings of the children keep the mystery alive. The Sodder family continued searching for answers for the rest of their lives, but the truth remains elusive. Story 11. The murder of the Walker family. A mysterious crime that stunned a small town. In 1953, a quiet rural town in the southern United States became the site of one of the most baffling and horrific murders in American history. The Walker family, parents Arthur and Doris and their children, 13-year-old Anna and 11-year-old John, were brutally murdered in their home, located on a secluded farm. On the night of the crime, neighbors reported hearing strange noises, but none of them thought to investigate. The next morning, a relative who lived nearby went to check on the family after not hearing from them for a day. What they found was nothing short of horrifying. The Walker family had been slaughtered in their beds. Arthur and Doris were both shot at point-blank range, while the 2 children were stabbed multiple times. Strangely, there were no signs of forced entry, and the house had not been ransacked. Nothing appeared to be stolen. For weeks, the investigation revealed few clues. Local authorities were baffled, and no evidence connected the crime to anyone in the town. What made the case even more unsettling was the fact that the Walker family's farm had no enemies, no financial problems, and there had been no signs of violence leading up to the crime. One theory posited that the family had been targeted for some unknown personal reason. Despite this, the lack of evidence and strange circumstances left the case unsolved for years. As investigators delved deeper, they discovered that just weeks before the murder, Doris had been in contact with a mysterious man, known only as the Traveler, who had been in and out of town frequently. Some witnesses recalled seeing him in the vicinity of the Walker home, but no one could ever recall his full identity. Had Doris known this man? Was he involved in the crime? Or had his presence in the area been purely coincidental? To this day, no one knows who was behind the Walker family murders, and the case remains unsolved. Story 12. The Unsolved Mystery of the Axeman of New Orleans. The Walker family's brutal murder reminds us of the unnerving mystery of a man who wreaked havoc on a different part of the country. Just a few years before, a series of shocking murders began in New Orleans in 1918. The killer, dubbed the Axe Man, gained notoriety for using an axe to murder his victims, often in their homes, while they slept. What was particularly strange about these murders was the eerie pattern behind them. Every attack took place in the dead of night, and there was no clear motive. The victims were often well-established members of the community, making it impossible to link them to any form of gang violence or personal vendetta. The Axeman's killing started slowly, 3 murders in 1918. But by 1919, the attacks had escalated, with several people falling victim to the axe-wielding maniac. But what made this case even more terrifying was the letter that the killer sent to the local newspaper. In it, the Axeman claimed that he would spare anyone who played jazz music in their homes on a particular night. The city, terrified yet intrigued, responded by hosting impromptu jazz parties in hopes of escaping the Axeman's wrath. Story 13. The Alaskan Serial Killer Who Hunted Humans. The next story is about a man who roamed the icy wilderness of Alaska, a place where the vast, unbroken landscape can make even the bravest feel insignificant. It's a story that reminds us of the darkness that can lurk within a seemingly peaceful world, far from the reach of civilization. His name is Robert Hansen, and he was a man who preyed on the vulnerable, hunting them as if they were nothing more than game. Alaska, the land of towering snow-capped mountains, dense forests, and endless cold, is often associated with vast wilderness adventures. But beneath its serene beauty lies a darker side, a place where isolation can breed madness, and where a predator can remain undetected for years. Hansen's story is one that sends chills down the spine, not just because of his chilling crimes, but because of the eerie silence in which they were carried out. Robert Hansen was born in 1939 in a small town in Iowa. From a young age, there were signs of the twisted path he would eventually take. He was an awkward child, socially isolated, and had a difficult relationship with his father. Hansen's father was a strict man who ridiculed Robert for his appearance and shy nature. These early experiences planted seeds of anger, resentment, and a deep sense of inferiority in Robert. It's as if the world had never quite accepted him, and he would one day exact revenge on those he deemed worthy of his wrath. As a young man, Hansen enlisted in the military, hoping to escape the painful memories of his childhood. But even there, he couldn't quite fit in. His deepening anger began to turn inward, then outward, as he struggled with relationships, especially with women. His inability to form meaningful connections seemed to fuel his rage. He became obsessed with the idea of control, of having power over others, and it was this obsession that would lead him to commit unspeakable acts. In the early 1970s, Hansen moved to Anchorage, Alaska. It was there, amidst the beauty and isolation of the state, that his dark fantasies began to take shape. He opened a small bakery and became known as a quiet, unassuming man who kept to himself. He married and had children, maintaining an outwardly normal life. But underneath the surface, Robert Hansen was anything but ordinary. Behind the bakery, he kept a secret that no one could have ever imagined. Hansen was not just a baker. He was a hunter of humans. He would stalk his prey with a methodical precision, much like a predator in the wild. His victims were often women, some of them sex workers, some were just ordinary women he encountered by chance. They were vulnerable in a world where their voices often went unheard. Hansen didn't discriminate. He chose his victims based on their weakness, their isolation, and their vulnerability. His methods were chilling. Hansen would abduct his victims, often luring them with promises of work or escape from their current circumstances. Once in his grasp, he would take them to his remote cabin, a place deep in the Alaskan wilderness where he could do as he pleased, far from the eyes of the law. There, he would unleash his twisted fantasies, hunting them down like animals in a game he had set up himself. He would release them into the wild, giving them a head start, and then he would chase them, armed with a rifle. The hunt was part of his sick thrill, the fear and desperation of his victims only adding to his pleasure. The wilderness became his hunting ground, and he was the predator. He had a vast knowledge of the land, and it was this knowledge that allowed him to remain undetected for years. His victims, once released into the cold, unforgiving wilderness, had little hope of survival. Hansen was ruthless, his skill as a hunter making him nearly impossible to catch. He would track them, and when the time was right, he would strike. The bodies of his victims were scattered across the Alaskan terrain, hidden in caves, buried in the snow, or left to rot in the vast emptiness of the wild. For years, Hansen eluded authorities, blending into the landscape, hiding in plain sight. His unremarkable appearance, a quiet, middle-aged man with glasses, made him the last person anyone would suspect. He was the perfect predator, his outward persona so ordinary that no one would ever think to look beneath the surface. But as is often the case with serial killers, their desire for control and their need to satisfy their darkest urges eventually lead to mistakes. It was in 1983 that Robert Hansen's reign of terror began to unravel. A woman named Cindy Paulson, a sex worker, managed to escape from his clutches after being abducted. She was shaken and terrified, but she found the strength to tell authorities what had happened to her. Her story would become the key to unraveling the mystery of Hansen's crimes. At first, the police were skeptical. Cindy's story was bizarre, and there was no physical evidence to link Hansen to the crime. But as they investigated further, they began to connect the dots. The police learned that Hansen had a history of violence, and his actions began to look increasingly suspicious. The details Cindy provided matched up with those of other women who had gone missing, and soon enough, the authorities were able to track down Hansen's cabin in the wilderness. What they discovered was both horrifying and telling. Inside the cabin, they found evidence of Hansen's twisted fantasies, including photographs of his victims and weapons used for his hunts. But the most chilling discovery was the map that Hansen had kept, a map that showed the locations where he had buried his victims. It was clear that Hansen had been methodically hunting women, his activities spanning several years and claiming the lives of at least 17 women, though some believe the true number of victims may be even higher. In 1984, Robert Hansen was arrested and charged with the murder of multiple women. He pleaded guilty to the charges, and in exchange for a reduced sentence, he led investigators to the remains of his victims, giving them a sense of closure and bringing an end to the nightmare that had plagued Alaska for so long. Hansen was sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Robert Hansen's story is one of the most chilling in the annals of true crime. It's a reminder of how easily darkness can hide behind a facade of normalcy, and how the quietest places, even the remote wilderness, can conceal the most horrific secrets. His hunting ground, the vast, cold expanse of Alaska, became a symbol of the terror he wrought. And though he is now behind bars, the memory of his crimes serves as a chilling reminder of the evil that can lurk in the most unexpected places. As we think about Robert Hansen's story, we are reminded of the importance of never underestimating the darkness that can hide behind seemingly ordinary faces. It's a reminder to stay vigilant and aware of the signs, to listen to the stories of those who are often ignored, and to never let the silence of isolation give way to the silence of fear. Story 14. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders. It was the spring of 1946 in the small, sleepy town of Texarkana, a border town straddling the line between Texas and Arkansas. The warm Texas night was clear and still, with only the faintest breeze moving through the trees. The town was known for its charm, its small-town atmosphere, and the kind of quiet that most people long for. But that peaceful tranquility would be shattered that year by a series of horrific events that would leave the town in fear and speculation for years to come. On the evening of February 22nd, 1946, two young lovers, Jimmy Hollis, 25, and Mary Jean Jenny May, 19, were parked on a secluded country road on the outskirts of Texarkana. The couple, as most couples did at the time, were parked in a quiet, dark spot, enjoying each other's company. But this was no ordinary night. What they didn't know was that they were about to become victims of an unspeakable crime. A man, his face obscured by a cloth mask, approached the couple's car and, without warning, ordered them out at gunpoint. The man was calm, almost eerily so, and he forced them both out of the vehicle. Jimmy was ordered to remove his pants, and he was struck in the face with the blunt end of the gun, knocking him unconscious. The masked man then turned to Mary Janie and told her to lie on the ground. He assaulted her before taking her into the woods, where she was sexually assaulted and left for dead. Somehow, against all odds, she managed to survive. When Mary Jeanne woke up, she was in a daze, disoriented, and terrified. She managed to crawl to the nearby road, where she was found by a passing car. Bloodied and barely able to speak, she told the driver what had happened. Jimmy was found shortly afterward, barely alive but still clinging to life. The police were called immediately, and the investigation began. But what seemed like a straightforward case quickly became anything but that. Jimmy and Mary Jeanne, despite their traumatic experience, were able to provide the police with a description of the attacker. They described him as a tall man with a deep, gravelly voice and a thick, almost oppressive demeanor. The most disturbing part of the story was the fact that the man had been wearing a mask, one that hid his identity completely. There were no clear clues about who he was or why he had chosen them as his victims. The attack on Jimmy and Mary Jeanne was only the beginning. Just over a month later, on March 24, 1946, another young couple, Richard Griffin, 29, and Polly Ann Moore, 17, were found dead in a similar manner. The two had been out on a date, parked on a desolate stretch of road near the edge of town. They were found by a passing motorist who had stopped when he saw the car parked in an unusual position. At first, it seemed like a car accident, but as he got closer, he saw the gruesome reality of the situation. Richard and Polly Ann were lying face down in the backseat of the car, both shot in the back of the head. It was a brutal and calculated act, and it immediately became clear that this was no random shooting. The killer had struck again, and this time the crime scene was eerily similar to the one in the first attack. The investigation into the murders of Richard and Polly Ann quickly took on a sense of urgency. As the police combed the area for evidence, they found a number of disturbing clues. There were footprints around the car, indicating that the killer had been close to the victims before the shooting. The most chilling clue, however, was a torn piece of cloth found near the scene. The cloth was similar to the one that had been used to mask the attacker in the first crime. It was clear that the same person had committed both murders. As the investigation continued, fear spread throughout Texarkana. The town, once peaceful and quiet, was now living in the shadow of an unknown killer. No one knew who would be next, and the police seemed powerless to stop the attacks. They could find no witnesses, no fingerprints, and no other leads. All they had were the descriptions provided by the survivors, but they were too vague to be of any real use. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but the killer remained elusive. The residents of Texarkana began to live in fear, locking their doors at night and staying inside after dark. The once peaceful streets were now filled with tension as people wondered when the next attack would come and whether they would be the next victims. By the time the third attack took place on May 3, 1946, the killer's pattern was beginning to emerge. The victims were always young couples, parked in secluded areas at night, vulnerable to attack. The killer seemed to prefer dark, isolated locations where he could carry out his brutal crimes without anyone seeing or hearing him. The third attack was different, however. The victims, 15-year-old Betty Jo Booker and 16-year-old Paul Martin, were found dead in a car parked along a quiet road on the outskirts of Texarkana. But this time, the bodies were found by a motorist who had stopped to use the road. The car was running and the lights were on, which suggested that the killer had not followed his usual pattern of approaching the victims in total darkness. It was almost as if the killer was becoming bolder, more reckless. Betty Jo and Paul had been shot multiple times, and the crime scene was almost identical to the previous two. However, this time, there were additional clues left behind. A bloody handprint was found on the car's door handle, and there were more footprints in the dirt surrounding the vehicle. It was a breakthrough that suggested the killer might have been injured during the attack. The police believed that this evidence might lead them to the killer, but again, they were no closer to catching him. As the summer of 1946 wore on, the people of Texarkana became more and more paranoid. The killer, dubbed the Phantom Killer by the press, was still out there, and it seemed like no one was safe. Local authorities worked tirelessly to solve the case, but every lead turned out to be a dead end. Then, in July of 1946, something strange happened. The attack suddenly stopped. No one knew why. Some speculated that the killer had moved on, leaving Texarkana behind. Others believed that he had been apprehended, though there was no clear evidence to support this theory. The mystery of the Texarkana Moonlight murders remained unsolved, and the people of the town were left to wonder what had happened. In the years that followed, the case faded from the public eye. But the questions remained. Who was the Phantom Killer? What motivated these horrific crimes? And why did the attacks stop so suddenly? To this day, the Texarkana Moonlight murders remain unsolved, a chilling reminder of a time when fear gripped an entire town and a killer eluded justice. Though many theories have been put forth over the years, the true identity of the Phantom Killer is still a mystery, leaving the people of Texarkana and the world wondering if the killer ever truly disappeared or if he is still out there, waiting for the next victim. 14. The Tylenol murders. On a quiet September day in 1982, a series of events unfolded that would send shockwaves through America, sparking widespread panic and forever changing the way we think about the safety of over-the-counter medications. The Tylenol murders began with a simple, everyday purchase. On September 29, 1982, Mary Kellerman, a 12-year-old girl from Arlington Heights, Illinois, woke up feeling ill. Her parents gave her a regular Tylenol extra strength capsule to help with her cold symptoms. Just hours later, she was dead. At first, her death seemed to be a tragic and unexplained case, but soon something sinister began to unfold. The very same day that Mary Kellerman died, another person in the Chicago area, Adam Janus, a 27-year-old man, also died after taking Tylenol. This time, however, the tragedy was compounded. Adam's brother and sister-in-law, Stanley and Teresa Janus, who had gone to their brother's home to grieve, also took Tylenol, believing it was a harmless remedy for their stress. Within hours, both of them were dead as well. The bizarre deaths caught the attention of law enforcement, but it wasn't until an investigation uncovered a terrifying truth that the situation took a chilling turn. All the victims had taken Tylenol capsules from the same batch, capsules that had been tampered with. Someone had deliberately laced the Tylenol pills with cyanide, a deadly poison that could kill within minutes of ingestion. But what made this case even more disturbing was that the cyanide was inserted into the capsules without any sign of tampering on the outside. To the naked eye, they appeared to be perfectly normal. As the investigation deepened, it was discovered that the tainted Tylenol had been sold at various stores across the Chicago area. It was as if the killer had placed the poisoned pills on the shelves of a number of retailers, knowing that people from all walks of life would buy them. Over the next few days, Tylenol bottles were pulled from shelves across the country in an urgent recall. But by then, several more people had already died, and the sense of panic and fear had spread like wildfire. The public response was immediate and dramatic. People were terrified to take over-the-counter medications, fearing that they might be the next victim. Tylenol, a trusted and widely used painkiller, became a symbol of the fear and distrust that gripped the nation. Johnson & Johnson, the maker of Tylenol, acted swiftly, pulling more than 31 million bottles of Tylenol from the shelves and offering refunds. Despite their rapid response, the damage was done. The authorities soon realized that they were dealing with an extraordinarily meticulous and calculated criminal. The person responsible for these deaths, who had poisoned the pills in such a public and malicious manner, had managed to evade any clear identification. The investigation into the Tylenol murders spanned years, but despite countless theories and potential suspects, the case remained unsolved. The FBI joined the search for the killer, but they faced a complex puzzle. How had the killer gained access to the Tylenol bottles? How did they manage to tamper with the capsules without leaving any evidence? The case took many twists and turns over the years, including a suspect being briefly arrested, but no conclusive evidence was ever found. The Tylenol murders forever changed the way the world viewed the safety of products. In response to the poisonings, new safety measures were quickly implemented. Tamper-proof packaging became a standard for medications across the country, and other consumer goods followed suit. Yet despite the changes, the killer was never found, and the motives behind the crime remain a mystery. Was it a random act of violence, a personal vendetta, or a calculated plan to create fear and chaos? The questions remain unanswered, and the Tylenol murders continue to haunt the public's mind as one of the most unsettling and perplexing cases in American history. To this day, the true identity of the killer remains unknown, leaving a chilling mark on the legacy of the case. And with that, we reach the end of tonight's stories. Each of these true crime cases, mysterious, chilling, and often unsolved, reminds us of the complexities of human nature and the darkness that can hide in unexpected places. While some mysteries may remain unresolved, they serve as reminders of the resilience and curiosity that define us. As the night deepens and the world grows quieter, I hope these stories have brought you some measure of comfort or at least helped you unwind. If you're still awake, let's take a moment together. Breathe in deeply and exhale slowly. Let the weight of the day drift away. Good night, and may you find peace and serenity in the stillness of the night. Remember, no matter how dark the story, a new day is always on the horizon. Sleep well.